Where we are going to focus on the e-health part. Yes, just sit down. We're going to have 3 presentations, and the 2 first one are connected, so if you could wait with your very, very eager questions and write them down if you're scared of forgetting them, then we take them after the first 2 presentations. So we are going to try to get a bit into both the primary care on projects that are working in that way, and then also on the bigger research platform in Norway. How many of you work with e-health on a daily basis? Okay. And how many of you think that we have no security issue with e-health? No anarchists? Okay. How many of you work with biological data, like genomics or stuff like that? Oh, so only 2 geeks, me and you. That's good. Okay, so let's start. First, we have Guri Rørtvedt, almost Norwegian. Could I pass the nationality test? Okay. Good. She will explain the practical part of the PraxisNet, this new approach, and the floor is yours.
I'm sorry. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to come here and present this project, which is an infrastructure project. And it's based on a success abroad, in Ireland, UK, and so on. And so we have not just figured out a new way to do things. We have based this on international experience. The national partners are all the universities in Norway with the medical faculty, and NORS, which is a research institute, and the Norwegian Center for E-health Research. The project has a total cost of 88 million Norwegian kroner. 65 million is from the Research Council of Norway, whereas the rest is own financing. So a little bit about primary care in Norway, which I assume many of you won't know very much about beforehand. Many people think that might be about common cold, etc., but it's actually 15 million consultations each year, and it's about COPD, heart failure, cancer, atrial fibrillation, etc., etc., and not the least multimorbidity. So it's pretty tough consultations with a lot of information that is being reported every day and every year. And as many as 70% of the patients or of the population is actually visiting their GP each year. So this is a huge potential for research, as you can assume, but there is an extreme lack of research infrastructure in the primary care setting in Norway, which is, as I said, is not the same abroad, where we have research infrastructure for primary care called practice-based research networks, or practice-based research networks, which is what this project is being based on. So the solution is that we created the Norwegian Primary Care Research Network, which, as you can see, aspires to have a lot of clinical studies, which we can see that Scotland already has. They have many more studies than we do, although they are the same population and sort of more or less the same geography. So the goal here is to have more and better clinical studies, and much better use of the data. And I assume that that's what you're here for, is to learn more about the use of data. This is the management board. They are, I'm not going to tell you the names, but it's a lot of people from all over Norway. And Gustav, who sits here, he will talk just after me and go more into details about the data extraction. The project is based on two different parts. It's a human resource-based infrastructure and an IT-based infrastructure that Gustav will tell more about. Originally, this was two different projects, and we sort of connected in 2015, wasn't it, Gustav? and that's when things really got flying. And then we got the money from the Research Council last year. So that might be an example of an multidisciplinary approach that has been really helpful, and I'm sure will be successful in the future. We just started this year, so we'll see. A little bit about the human-based resource, based infrastructure. It's 4 regional networks which will connect to general practices all over Norway, mostly in the south, of course, because the population is bigger here. All these regional networks has a few staff connected. And there is also a coordinating node, which is based at the University of Bergen, which sort of coordinates the whole project. So we will recruit 90 practices from all over Norway, and they will cover around 10% of the population in this project when we have recruited all the practices. So a little bit about the IT part of the infrastructure. Again, Gustav will tell much more detailed about this, but the Snowbox is a small computer that is being connected to the local GP server. And I'm a doctor by background. I have worked as a GP for many years, and I know for sure that this is really important to the GPs, is that they can actually pull out the connection if they feel that the data is being used for purposes that they haven't approved. So this is normally when researchers want to do something with the GP's patients, they want to go into the server. This project doesn't do that, at least not as much. So there will be minimal interference with the electronic medical records, and that's very important. And we will extract pseudonymous aggregated data and individual data only by consent. And I think I'll stop by that because Gustav will get more into it. I will just tell a little bit about the data flow, and again, Gustav will get back to it, but I will give the overview, so to say. And the data is recorded, of course, at the local server, at the general practice, at the electronic medical record. It goes into the Snowbox locally, and from there, the aggregated data are being collected to the Snow coordinator server at the University Hospital in Tromsø. Data is then transferred to the net portal that we will set up, where the researchers can plan their research, see how many patients are available for that particular project, and so on. Also, this net portal will communicate with the GPs in a way that Gustav will tell more about, but that at this stage, the whole situation is totally new for researchers in terms of being able to know what's going on, how can I plan my project, how long will it take, and what's actually going on from day to day to see if patients have been included, etc., etc. So this is absolutely new and innovative. Then, of course, these data will also be used by us to sort of establish what is the epidemiological background for the data for the patients who are involved in this project. and and give some background data for researchers when they are going to publish. And last but not least, this is actually why we have set up this whole project, is that we want to be an infrastructure for clinical studies where researchers can get to the GPs who are now it's very difficult to access the GPs currently. They will access the GPs, they will recruit patients for the researchers, and then the data will be transferred directly to a safe haven set up by the research institution of the researcher. So the green line here you can see is bypassing our projects in the sense that we help create the data, but they are directly transferred to the researcher, which we don't have, and we don't have access to that data. So maybe if we're talking about the health analysis platform, the individual data will not be accessible for the infrastructure. So in terms of a health analysis platform, this data will have to be negotiated with the researchers themselves. So what's in it for the GPs? That's of huge interest for us to sort of recruit the laboratory that we are talking about here. Might not be as relevant for all of you, but it's crucial to actually recruit GPs. So it's to be very brief, it's about economical compensation for the time they spend on research, on helping recruitment and so on. And it's also access to use the software to own quality insurance and so on, which is also something GPs really look forward to. And it's a much more predictable way of taking part in research projects than what they have been used to. So in all this all this together, it's an attractive platform, we think, for GPs to take part in research projects. So the status, to be quick, is the organization has now been established the last year. Progress now depends on the IT infrastructure, and GDPR has of course been a challenge because it came just in the middle of everything for us. We have an active information strategy. As you can see, we're already branding ourselves, and you will see Gustav with the same jacket and so on. But we are much more than that. So we have been very, very active in informing GPs as well as researchers, and there is a huge interest from practices already. So when the aim is to have 90 practices with about 500 GPs into the project, we are already, without being very active in the recruitment strategy yet, we have already 80 practices saying that they are interested. The strategy for 2019 is to continue to develop the SNO technology, which Gustav will say more about. We will recruit the committed practices, hopefully as many as 80 by now, and then 90. And we are working actively now with the research environments to help them shift their mindset from thinking smaller projects or registry-based projects to thinking more into the clinic and bigger and higher quality projects. And we want to support the international collaboration that we already have, and we will enhance that in the future. And this is just to show you that there has been a lot of interest in this project already, and the Minister of Health actually called it a game changer for primary care research, and it really, really is. So if we are successful, this will be a huge change. Thank you.
I'll use everything I got. So.
Is there any urgent questions? No? Okay. So, right understood, you will get more into the details, but also on how you use clinical data. research, which is some of the main points here. Yes?
Yes, okay. So this is the second part of this PraksisNet presentation. I'm Gustav, and I'm a professor at the Norwegian Center for E-health Research and also at the Department of Clinical Medicine at the Arctic University of Norway. So in PraksisNet, I am the work package leader for the IT infrastructure, but I'm also a project leader for an ICT Plus project, which got funded from the Research Council, which is actually the foundation for PraksisNet. So I'll talk a little bit about results in that project as well. The project is called Assessing the Feasibility of a Learning Healthcare System Toolbox. Here I got this title, Implementation and Research, Challenges and Results so far. So this is the abstract. I guess these slides will be available afterwards, so you can read that those sentences there. I was just thinking that I should say something about the background, the challenges of doing e-health research, and how that integrates into clinical practice, and then move on to talk about IT infrastructure in PraksisNet, and then about the core technology or data processing principles that we use to enable the research infrastructure. That is the infrastructure both for PraksisNet and for the LHS Toolbox project. I'll also give some small mention some results that we have had in the research project, and if we have time, some questions, and hopefully some answers to you as well. Okay, background. This is the challenge for e-health research and clinical practice. So all e-health research follow the Friedman's Tower of achievements that you see on the left there. So every tool that is aimed to be used in clinical practice follow this methodology. And the steps are, the first thing is a model formulation, saying how are you going to impact patients and health workers. The model formulation stage is followed by a system development phase. And this is the first barrier that e-health projects face. Having enough resources to actually produce the tool that you will use in an intervention. Given that you succeed to actually produce the tool, you get to the system installation phase, which when the question becomes, does it actually work in a clinical practice? So you need to put the tool into practical use by health workers on real patients to see that it will actually work in the real system, in real clinical practice. If you survive that stage, you move on to the study of effects. And then you need to move the system into additional institutions, maybe across levels and so on. And then you finally can do the study of effects on patients and health workers. And moving from level to level here is where all the systems fall. Most of the systems fall off. The projects that I've been working on, some of the technology was started in 1995 as project ideas, or technology ideas. Moving on to the early 2000s, where we saw that, well, this is a new model, a new way of processing. And we worked all the way up to today to actually be able to run as a research infrastructure for our research project in e-health and as the research infrastructure for PraksisNet. So it takes an enormous amount of time, and this is the first challenge that every e-health project needs to face. The second challenge is that e-health research is also medical research, and then we need to support the Helsinki Declaration, Article 9, which states that the primary purpose of medical research involving human subjects is to understand the causes, development, and effects of disease and improve preventive, diagnostic, and therapeutic interventions. So that's the focus of medical research, and that is the methods, the procedures, and the treatments. There is a second part of this article, which states that even the best proven interventions must be evaluated continually through research for their safety, effectiveness, efficiency, accessibility, and quality. And especially this continually we are not doing. That is a challenge. So if we build a research infrastructure, we should make sure that we can do this continually as we move on. So this is a real challenge to answer. The third challenge is what is stated in Article 9, which states that it is the duty of physicians who are involved in medical research to protect the life, health, dignity, integrity, right to self-determination, privacy, and confidentiality of personal information of research subjects. This is the duty of researcher. This is, if you build a research infrastructure, you have to take care of this. So medical research actually has to be done privacy preserved. And this is the dilemma. We cannot do research without sharing data, or at least that's been the rule so far. You have to share the data to be able to do the analytics of actually discovering the truth. Another point is that participation in research is part of the patient-physician relationship. Nobody else than the patient and the physician inviting the patient to contribute need to know about this, that this project, this patient is actually part of this project. This is also a responsibility we have that follows from Article 9. Okay, let's move on to the IT infrastructure. The challenges I presented to you, surviving for some time to produce the infrastructure and to fulfill the ethical challenges that given by Helsinki Declaration is supported by this research infrastructure. So here we see the way data is partitioned in the health service. The dotted lines, there are firewalls. We have one against internet, and we have firewalls that protect each health institution. Locally in the GP offices, there is an EMR system, everybody uses it, that stores the data. There are different architecture where this data is stored. What we do in Praxisnet is to put the snowbox into the GP office, which extracts data from the EMR system. This snowbox is able to do aggregate data across the different institutions and put aggregated data indicated by the red barrel there into the snow coordination server. The portal that Yuri mentioned, where we can do distributed data analytics so that we can figure out, well, how many patients does actually exist with COPD in the GP offices that we cover with our infrastructure. We can, through this portal, we can establish projects, invite GPs, initiate data extraction, etc. We can also extract data from the coordinator serving, like epidemiological data, how many GPs, how many patients do we have, how many consultations are performed throughout the year, for instance. And finally, the research data sets, they are transferred from each GP office directly to Safe Haven. We have two such environments so far in Norway. That's the TSD in Oslo and SAFE in Bergen. That are secure computing environments where data is controlled. We're not distributing research data all over. It's only stored two places, in the GP offices and in the Safe Haven. This is the snow appliance box that we call it. It's a small computer, fits in everywhere. We install the snow software on the box and ship it to the GP offices. It's a very easy installation. Just put the network plug and some power. We have a centralized system management and monitoring system. And the box extracts GP office data automatically every day, in the evening or in the night. Important is that all the identifiers that exist in the EHR system, they are replaced by synonyms during the data extraction. So on the box, there is no identifier in that data. And now we move on to what are virtual data sets, and which is the core mechanism that we use in the LHA toolbox and in the PraxisNet IT infrastructure. When a researcher wants to start a project, he needs to invite the patients that satisfy the inclusion and exclusions criteria for that research project. So the researcher make a definition of that. So if I put the firewalls in here, just to remind you of the way the data is secured. So the researcher using the project portal makes a definition, is send it to the coordinator, which distributes it to all the GP offices or health institutions that are part of this project. And we create a virtual data set across the health institutions, like that. So now, locally on each GP office, there is a list of patients that satisfies the inclusion and exclusion criteria. What the clinician or the GP sees is just a list of patients that is a potential subject for a research project. That is much more efficient than what we have today, where they have to look through their EHR to actually see whether there is any patient that matches. And of course, GPs search differently. Here you have used one way of identifying the patients. And we use this infrastructure to ensure that we have a sufficient number of patients. So we know that when the data set is created, it contains 3,000 patients, and it's up to the GP to start asking if anybody wants to be part of this. And of course, we want to support Helsinki Declaration Article 9, privacy preservation. There's nobody else than the GP that knows that this patient is actually a subject and candidate for a research project. And here you see the study recruitment list for this Hostestudien, which is a fake study, and this Albus Dumbledore in English is one of the candidates. So the GP will use this tool to invite the GPs, and this is the invitation letter that is prepared by the researchers that the GP can walk to the table and just print it out and invite the patients. When the research data set is created, we also have the capability of doing distributed statistical computations. And for PraxisNet, this is very useful to monitor the progress of the recruitment phase. So to do, for instance, a query on the distribution of age distribution or the distribution between the sexes, we can define a query, send it to the coordinator, which distributes it out and makes the query towards the data in each institution. Then we use something called secure multi-party computations to actually produce the sum of that statistical query, and the result is sent back to the researcher. Using this mechanism, we can actually check that we don't introduce biases in the research project from the start. And we can also analyze the data when it's still inside the GP office. So this is very useful to support the inclusion of sufficient number, because we can follow this process from day to day. We can also do automated processing, so we can set up rules to say that every night we will do this processing and give the statistics to the researchers. So again, we distribute the query, do the secure multi-party computation, the result comes out and it's put into the report database. And this we can use to do to support Article 6 in the Helsinki Declaration, which is continuous evaluation. We can do this automatically for as long as we want to do it. So here you see one of the most important tools for the PraxisNet, which promises that when somebody comes and wants to do a research project, we can guarantee that there will be enough GPs, because we can, if we don't recruit fast enough, we can ask more GP officers. We can intensify the invitation of patients, and we can monitor from day to day how is the recruitment going, because that is crucial for a researcher to know that. I have 3 years, I need the data to complete it, and by using this tool I can see that, okay, we have enough, we can stop, or we don't have enough, we need to invite more GPs to contribute to the project. Then moving on to results so far, and this is, we're stepping out of the PraxisNet and how we support clinical research in GP offices, and more towards what will we see if we use this method of virtual dataset and distributed statistical processing. What can we do with that? And then we're more into clinical work. So here you see a medical decision tree, which is produced from clinical data, GP data. And what we use to create that decision tree is actually a virtual data set, which has an inclusion-exclusion criteria, so that we know that the patient sitting in the office matches the registry that is used to produce the decision tree. In this decision tree, this is a chronic pain patients. So the question here is what kind of drugs are normally used and what outcomes are useful or usual or frequent with different drugs. So this is, some of these are opioids actually. And the process is illustrated up to the right there. So we have clinical practice, which produces clinical data that can be used for research as well. And then we did a health analytics process to produce synthesized knowledge, and the knowledge is fed back to clinical practice to a decision support, which is included in the EHR. And this process takes 1 minute and 9 seconds to produce that decision tree. And you see there are 132 patients in this, that is the data foundation for the decision tree that you saw. So this is ongoing work from a PhD student from University of Padua, Elisa Salvi. So she's collaborating with us to work on the process that is illustrated. Moving on to another application of virtual datasets. So this is feedback to GPs on how they perform in prescribing antibiotics. In this case, for respiratory diseases, R74 Guri, what's that? Luftweisinfection. Yes. So what we did here was to do an aggregation across many GPs to produce the blue line. And if you can look carefully, you can see that the line is the average use of antibiotics is dropping for airway respiratory diseases, called R74. Yeah. And the red line, that's the individual data for one GP. So using this method of virtual data sets, we can create many such average numbers for the GP population and provide the individual data. And this, we don't need to share this data to actually produce the average. It's only the aggregated level that everybody can share. The individual data comes from the local installation. Okay. And final example, this is the disease surveillance service we've been running for many years in Norway. So we cover 2 health regions. And the lines you see over there in the bottom of the graphics, that data is from the microbiology laboratories. The bar graphs is from GP offices and shows what is going on in Troms at that time. So this data is collected every day and produced every day. And up there you see the famous Dr. John Snow, which is the famous epidemiologist from London. So to conclude, e-health research faces many challenges. It needs to be integrated in clinical practice to collect evidence. We need long time perspective, stable access to system development resources, and we need a research infrastructure for the e-health. Research infrastructures need to follow the Helsinki Declaration as well. And we need to support continuous evaluation and need to be privacy preserving. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Will you come up as well? To this 2 very good presentations, there must be some questions. No? Yes?
Wondering what sort of variables can you use to express queries and data collection?
Well, we can use all the variables that are in the EHR. So that is all the lab tests, all the sick leaves, all the prescriptions, all data.
Structural data.
Are all EHRs identical?
No.
How is that happening?
We map it to an open information model, which is called Open EHR, which is used by many EHR areas. So that's a common information model across many EHR systems. We map to that.
So, I think you are touching on some of the issues that we have been looking a lot for. How do we get information on the primary care? But how about, I don't know how you call this in English, hen-verbal, so you know that each data point is actually from the same person. How do you can you do that here?
Yeah. There is one of the components that extracts the data from the EHR. We call it the DRC, the data reuse component. It's a central component in ensuring the GDPR rights of the patients. Mm-hmm. And that component is also the one that produces the synonyms, an ID, a fake ID that will be the same across all institutions. So if you have Snow installed and you use the personal ID number, we encrypt it with some additional data, make sure that the same identifier is produced across all systems.
So you can both do correlation and causation? Yeah. Okay. And the security issue, the privacy issue?
Yeah, we've been through a DPIA process. It's approved, and we're ready to go, or we are actually going. We're out there now.
But we were a little bit delayed by the GDPR process.
Yeah, why?
Because we had to do the DPIA, for example. We had to make sure that everything we had already planned for many years was up to the new standards. So that took a little while, especially for the NCE.
But are there any specific issues? So I mean, GDPR has been known for a long time that it would come. What specific issues were surprising?
Well, one thing is this: can you use the data for including patients, identifying them? That is an issue. So GDPR states that, well, if you process the data to ensure the rights, GDPR, then you can process the data. So because of GDPR, we can actually identify the patients in the infrastructure, because we need to make sure that every patient knows that we are going to use the data and we want their consent.
And then if we think some years ahead, so I'm from the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, so the present is not so interesting. No, but what about feedback to the individual? Because I mean, all the Nordic countries are working very much on that prevention should be a part of it, but we are missing a bit. What do we give back to the average citizen so they actually can act?
And that is a very important question. So the patients, they will get the data that we plan to include in the study. By having the data, they can make sure that the data is correct, and they have the right to correct the data. So if there's something wrong in the data, they can tell the GP to correct it, and they have that right. So by having these rights, we sort of are able to take some additional steps, actually, that is beneficial for research.
Yes, thank you. Any questions? Have we resolved all the issues for data in the primary care in Norway?
Yes.
Yes. And this is the new export venture. Stop with oil, now it's data.
Well, actually, to be honest, UK, Ireland, Canada are all very, very interested in what we're doing in Norway, and not the least what we're doing with the snow technology. So, yeah, it's pretty innovative, and it creates a lot of interest. Yeah.
And so, if you don't speak, you agree. Is that how the conclusion is? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, and our next speaker, Christian Jonasson, will take more on the large-scale infrastructure of biobanks in Norway. And this bridges, I think, I don't know what you think, also to a project like this. So let's hear if we can combine the more biobank background data with a project like this. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, I represent another national research infrastructure called Biobank Norway, and that is a nationwide infrastructure comprising all the 4 large universities, the regional healthcare enterprises, the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, and the Cancer Registry. We have been existing since 2011 and are now closing up our second round of funding from the Norwegian Research Council, and have just submitted our application to hopefully continue this very important effort of utilizing the Norwegian biobanks and health data better. So the title of my talk today is Norwegian Secondary Health Data and Biobanks to Drive Precision Medicine, Hypo Promise. So since there were only 1 or 2 hands when Bogi asked about who is working with genetics and genomics, I may start with the definition of precision medicine. And that is an approach where you use an individual's genetic makeup or other molecular subtypes or data to stratify or divide a group of patients into subcategories, and where you use a biomarker or a test to actually pinpoint the ones that have hopefully then effect of a intervention and where you avoid side effects. So that's a very promising concept, but comes also with a lot of challenges. And we have, apart from cancer and rare genetic diseases, the introduction of precision medicine into healthcare has been quite slow. And I will in the following describe some of the important challenges when it comes to driving precision medicine forward using health data as an umbrella. So I will focus more on the drug drug and medicines going forward, but the scope with precision medicine is much larger than that, but just to concentrate on drug development. And one of the really important challenges is really the poor productivity in R&D. As some of you know, it takes a long time, and it's very costly and risky to develop a new drug and take it from basic science all the way to the market. It takes 8 to 10 years and costs hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. And only 1 in 10 molecules actually enters the market. So many points to that this model of developing drugs are unaffordable and unsustainable. So we need to find new models where we hopefully then we'll come back to that, integrate secondary health data and biobanks into this development process. One other challenge obviously is slow data access and lack of data interoperability. In order to drive a more, or in order to have a more data-driven or more digitized R&D process, is today hindered in the way we have organized the different data sources like biobanks and registries into data silos that are governed and maintained by different registry and biobank holders. So as a consequence, it takes too long time to get hold of data. The third challenge is really, once you are successful in reaching the market, the next hurdle is to actually get a new technology implemented into routine care. And as this concept of precision medicine entails that you will pinpoint your therapy to a subgroup of patients where the evidence base perhaps is much lower than it was in the old-fashioned way of developing drugs that introduce some challenges for regulators and other bodies to balance this evidence with patient access. And as you can see on the picture, I think you can replace the health minister or Obama with the industry having troubles to get through, but ultimately that the patients have difficulty accessing new therapies. So, can health data be a solution to drive precision medicine forward? A hype or promise? So I believe it holds great promise, but it's also hyped. But better hyped than forgotten. Come on, give it a chance on a second thought. Just go for it. So I think that's my. I think it's a lot of opportunities in this field if we play our cards right in Norway and in the Nordic, for that sake. So I will now turn to giving you some of the solutions how health data can drive precision medicine and a more effective drug development process. And actually already today health data and biobanks are an integrated part of drug R&D, all the way from basic research to clinical development and also after approval. So the first case I would like to talk about is actually using genetic data that sits in biobanks together with associated health data, and use that actually as the very first outset in the drug discovery process. And that concept is using large cohorts where you have genetic data, or you have blood samples where you can extract DNA, where you then do genotyping or sequencing or both at scale. And two studied and the association between genetics and different disease and health disease outcomes. And one of the concepts with this is to look for individuals that have what we call loss of function mutations, and that is something where you are fortunate to have from birth onwards a genetic variant that can protect you from developing disease. One of the tricky things with this is that those variants are rare, so you need to have really large patient population in order to find have robust findings here. But this is something that drug companies now are using very effectively, then taking that data and that information and develop a molecule that sort of mimic the function of nature. So that's also why some call this concept the nature's own randomized clinical trial. So just to give you one of the, and this has also been supported by companies that this is something that can really drive a more effective drug development, and in particular it's a method where you actually can prove causality between an intervention and health outcome at the very outset of a drug discovery project, instead of waiting till you have the clinical trial results. So one of the examples here that is often cited is a group of researchers in the US that found one of those rare loss of function mutation called a PCSK9. In this material, 2.6% of the cohort had loss of function mutations in this gene. And those that were carriers had a lower LDL cholesterol and virtually no presence of cardiovascular disease, as you can see on the graph there. So two companies have then developed monoclonal antibodies to this target, and it's a very quick process from the first basic findings actually to the market. So the next thing I would like to address is during the clinical development phase, where health data also can play a role. As we will get more and more specialized drugs addressing smaller and smaller patient population, the old established way of running randomized clinical trials pressure, especially in areas where we have a high unmet need and perhaps even unethical to run a controlled study. Regulators in the US and Europe are working on new models for evidence generation that combines the traditional clinical trial with using retrospective data from registries. Just as an example, the FDA last year approved pembrolizumab, Keytruda. It's an immuno-oncology substance for the treatment of solid tumors based on what we call microsatellite instability. It's a very rare cancer form with no or limited treatment options. And actually this approval was then based on a small single-arm uncontrolled trial with 139 patients, but where they used retrospective observational data as a foundation for this approval. So I think that's an interesting concept, and we will see more of those kind of approvals going forward. And that, I think, takes me to the next solution for health data, and that is actually to monitor, once you put one of those drugs that perhaps do not have all the evidence at the time of approval, maybe a conditional approval as well, you have some obligations to monitor cost, side effect, and effectiveness when you put it in clinical practice. So, this is just some examples from Norway, first of all, where we had the pandemic flu a few years ago. Well, it's almost 10 years ago now, isn't it? Where we used registry data to elucidate if there was a risk of increased risk of stillbirths among pregnant women that were taking the pandemic flu. It was proven that it was the opposite, in fact. So that's a good example. Another example is from Sweden, where the anti-TNF alpha inhibitors, which is now a mainstay treatment for rheumatoid arthritis, when those drugs were first launched, it was a bit unclear whether it increased the risk of lymphomas, and in this case they used the Swedish Biologics Registry to follow up the introduction of those anti-TNF alpha in Sweden. But both of those examples are actually a bit misleading as well, because actually you would like to have more real-time data so you can monitor, at least if you have a potential health threat, as the first example was with the pandemic flu. You would like to have more real-time monitoring of this. So turning back to the